Today, I'm joined by Professor Matt Goodwin. Thanks. First time on the show, Matthew.
Thanks, mate.
And our resident left in the corner, Matthew Laws, is back on the show. I've got to be nice to him. My mother says I pick on him a little bit. That's not true, is it, Matthew?
I think,
That's enough.
Your mother's always right. Your mother's always right.
We're going to get straight to it, guys. Straight to it. He's chirping away again. Look, this week we've seen some heavy scenes in Parliament, lots of pylons, Matt, on Twitter, on politicians of all sides. And I'm thinking to myself, it's getting a little bit nasty, a little bit distasteful. Is social media the new pitchfork brigade? Is it affecting people's mental health, the recipients, and the people who's actually, dishing it out?
I think it is. I think this week's reminded me a bit of those Brexit days, just as Parliament was trying to get the votes through. I think because an issue like immigration is so emotive, because as we saw in a report this week, 90% of all seats in the country want to see immigration reduced. Lots of people really care about it. I think they feel strongly that Parliament isn't really representing them on that issue. And the fact is, and I'm sure you know this, most MPs on both the right and the left lean further to the left than the average voter on issues like migration. So many people are watching on social media thinking, actually, I'm not sure these MPs are really representing me. They're not really representing my voice.
So is the social media stuff, is that people's frustration or is it going too far?
I don't think personally it's going too far. I think it's just a new form of communication. I'm worried, to be honest, about the effects on mental health, by the way. If you look at the evidence in the US, a lot of people now, serious psychologists are saying, let's get smartphones out of schools because they're doing damage to kids. But when it comes to politics, of course, it's polarized. Politics has always been polarized. 1980s, people will remember Thatcher and how polarizing that was. But I think social media has allowed people to have a direct route into people like you, into the MPs. And I think that's made it quite combative.
Matthew?
Well, I think social media is a problem in that it's taking a real toll on our politics. I think that one of the things that nobody ever talks about, of course, is it's a relatively small number of people who dominate, who make a lot of hot air on social media, and they, in a sense, crowd out the views of other people. I think the danger is that their voice is that he who shouts loudest gets heard the most. That's always been the case.
But they don't necessarily win, though, do they, Matthew?
No, they don't. But I think they do sometimes change the terms of the debate. And I also think, MPs of all parties, it's a really, it has a real effect on. I actually think that we should do an experiment. Let's get a couple of MPs to come off social media and see if they're, when the election comes, if their results are any different to those who spend their lives tweeting and then dealing with the responses.
See, I don't like to be controversial on social media, but you can guarantee if I get up in the middle of the night and I go to the toilet, say I'll make a cup of tea, and I happen to tweet and I shouldn't, or put a post out, you can guarantee within 20 seconds, literally, it's the same trolls are straight back at you.
Yeah.
What's all that about?
You've got to mute them. You've got to block them. You've got to get someone to go through your social media and clean them up. You know what's interesting? I was looking at some of the research on social media, and it's quite interesting. Matthew's right. There are certain people that dominate Twitter. Often they tend to be people on the radical left who tend to dominate Twitter, kind of progressives.
Lunatics.
And the evidence shows they are the most likely of all to block people whose views they disagree with. So a lot of the liberals who say they're liberal, often within these debates are actually quite illiberal. They're trying to shut down the debate rather than open it up.
It's right, Matthew, because I was speaking to a colleague just yesterday in Parliament who'd had this spat with, I'm not going to name this lady, but she's always on Twitter. She's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And she'd been trolling him for weeks, and he never bit once. And as soon as he went back, she played the mental health card.
I think certainly people can give it out, but they don't always take it on social media. So it is easy to suddenly say that you're being affected when you're not always as conscious of how what you're saying is impacting on other people. I mean, I would genuinely believe that if we literally reduce the amount of time that politicians spent on Twitter, it would be a very good thing. I think in the UK it has a smaller role to play than it does in the States. I honestly think that because of our constituency system, I honestly think that MPs who don't spend their time tweeting would find that it didn't have any impact on their results at all. So for their mental health, I think it's a good idea to certainly tone down the tweets, use it just as an announcement board, and certainly to mute all those replies.
I think there's that expectation now from the public that expect you to be on there. They want a running live commentary, if you like, of what's going on in Parliament, what's going on in the constituency. And generally they want the updates, obviously, which are nice. But, I went on holiday, I think it was last year. I had a week off of social media and I felt great. And I know I've only been on Twitter just a year. I've only been on there. somewhere I've amassed about 100,000 followers. Probably 90% of them aren't very, they don't say nice things about me, but that's by the by. But I actually did feel better having that little break.
Yeah, so you had a digital detox, that's what they call it, digital detox. Yeah, I've had one of those a few times. Yeah, I mean, I think it can get overwhelming, but at the end of the day, look, my view is, if you look at the institutions in this country, if you look at, say, BBC, universities, schools, Parliament, the reality in Britain today is the institutions don't give sufficient voice to many of the people who are not in those institutions. Okay. So I'm a fan of anything that magnifies the voice of people who are not in those institutions. And that could be Twitter, but it could be all these new TV channels like GB News, or it could be, YouTube shows or whatever, or new platforms or Substacks and all that stuff. And I think that new media actually is critically important because legacy media, old media, in my view, has shown itself to be too narrow, too insular, and that's why people are becoming less trusting of it.
Matthew, you see some of these profiles, these prolific trolls that will troll people like yourself and Matt and me, and then you go on the profile and have a look, and it's a fake profile. It's a silly picture, a cartoon picture. I've always said this before, that to set up a social media account, there should be some sort of verification and ID check. So you find that people, they would say something on Twitter or Facebook which you wouldn't necessarily say in real life to your face. And I know some of the left scream out, it's we need whistleblowers, we need to be able to say things without risk of harm. I think that's a lot of nonsense. I think if you're going to say nasty things or criticise people, you should man up and put your face out there. Do you think that's right?
So I think, so I'm not sure that I agree that you should legally have to give your name and address to be able to sign up for a social media account, but I think it's the old school approach, isn't it? MPs used to get letters, and those which had a name and address at the top of them, even if they were being critical, people would read and respond to, and those which were written in green ink anonymously, they ignored. And I think on social media, people need to do the same. So if it's a cartoon profile, block it and don't engage with it. I think that's the way to do it, rather than bringing in new rules, Lee. I'm not sure that I believe in over-regulation.
Just briefly on that, the intensity of the abuse on Twitter, do you know why that is partly? Thomas Sowell once made a good point. He said, why is it that the left are so much more hostile than the right? Why are they so much more personal? And he said, the problem is, conservatives think liberals are misguided, but liberals think conservatives are evil. So they have a very different moral vision of the world, what he called a conflict of visions. And I think that's partly what we see play out on social media, because the worst abuse and hostility I get is often from people who claim to be the most liberal, the most tolerant, the most enlightened of all. But if you violate their sacred beliefs, if you question immigration or you question globalization...
Is this, Matt, the kind of gentle politics?
No, it isn't. I mean, I'm worried about where we're going in British politics, and I know you are, because we've been talking about it. I think when you look at the big issues that are going to dominate the next 10, 20 years, and those issues are going to be about identity, they are going to be about belonging, they are going to be about immigration, they are going to be about borders. What worries me, I think, is we're not learning the lessons of the 2010s. We're not actually representing the wishes of the wider majority on those issues, and we're going to end up sliding into a kind of US-style polarization. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to be like America. We want to be different, but that means we've got to take the British people seriously. We've got to deliver what we promised them, which is control borders, lower immigration.
Okay, guys, look, that was a great debate. Could talk about that forever, but now we've got the yes or no quiz with Matt and Matthew. Time now for the yes or no quiz with Matthew and Matt. Matthew, you struggle on this a little bit. So, hey, we're going to get 5 out of 5 this time.
Remember what your mother said?
Yes.
Be nice to me.
Matt, it's yes or no. You can.
All right.
There's no right or wrong answers, but it's got to be a yes or no.
Try not to get me cancelled, Lee.
Okay then. Let's go. Matthew, is Parliament representative of the population?
Yes.
No.
Number 2 for Matt. Grammar schools, yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Wow, this is good. Matthew, number 3. Should council house tenants be allowed to buy their homes?
Yes.
No.
Number 4, Matt, should we frack our own gas in the UK?
Yes.
Matthew?
No.
And final question, Matt, should we leave the ECHR?
Yes.
No.
Wow, I do not believe it. 5 out of 5. That's brilliant. I think last week we had Susan Hall on. She She got 4, but she struggled on one of the questions. It's a toughie, isn't it? Yes or no?
Yeah, we're allowed to justify one, aren't we?
Yes.
So I'll go council houses to justify.
Okay.
So yes, I think people should have the right to buy their own council house. It was one of Labour's biggest mistakes in the 80s to oppose that, but only if there is a sufficient supply of new council houses, new social housing.
1 for 1.
I think 1 for 1 would be fair. I mean, you can't individually match one, so you have to make sure that the numbers are broadly equal. So if it gives but you can't now take away that right. So there has to be circumstances and rules and limits. But yeah, in the principle, I'm fine with.
Let me justify the ECHR, because I think we should leave. Look, I think basically we're on the cusp of a global growing crisis around migration and refugees. I think we promised British people control of their own borders, national sovereignty. We said we take their wishes seriously. Leaving any international conventions, courts, ruling that will allow us to protect British people is now going to be at the top of the agenda. We should do that. We should give them what we promised, which is control.
Do you agree with that, Matthew?
No, I mean, I made a documentary 15 years ago when the Tories first came to power about the ECHR with Andrew Neil, who started out broadly with your perspective, Matt. And we went on a literal journey, including to the court itself in Strasbourg, spoke to people, to Russian dissidents who'd used it, etc., and looked into the cases that Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, was claiming, and came to the conclusion that just leaving the ECHR is not the golden bullet that people think it is.
So I would just briefly say it's not just leaving the ECHR. Personally, I think with an 80-seat majority, Conservatives should have reformed.
It was a Tory invention, of course, the ECHR.
Should have reformed the Human Rights Act. They should probably reform the Equalities Act. It should be part of an array of measures that we should do to enable us to control who comes in and out of the country, including, by the way, foreign national.
Oh, thanks guys for that. This documentary, Matthew, where can I find that?
I think it's on YouTube. It's called Right's Gone Wrong ?
Okay, I will write that down because I'm struggling to sleep at night these days, and I will get that and play that probably Friday night.
Holy, your mother's not going to be happy.